Pushpin disclaimer: this story is a fictional narrative crafted purely for emotional and dramatic storytelling purposes. It is intended to entertain and resonate with readers who enjoy character-driven tales of vulnerability, human connection, and transformation. Any similarities to actual persons or events are purely coincidental. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Emily sat on the edge of her worn-out couch, the remote in her hand, clicking it again and again, hoping the TV would flicker to life. It didn't. Just static. A dull gray buzz that seemed to echo her entire life, stuck, directionless, and painfully silent. Her apartment wasn't just a home. It had become a cage. The kind of place where the clock ticked louder than any voice, where shadows stretched long after the sun had set. She hadn't spoken to anyone in days. Not since her last video call with her mom, who lived 3 states away and always ended their conversations with, "You should get out more, honey." But Emily never did. Work from home had its conveniences, but it had also become a slow poison for her social life. It had been over a year since her breakup, a messy, painful ending that left her emotionally paralyzed. Since then, Emily had locked herself away. She worked, she ate, she slept. Repeat. Today, something inside her felt heavier. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the broken TV, the only thing that filled her empty nights with stories not her own. And now, even that had gone dark. She stared at the wall, then glanced toward the apartment next door. She had seen her neighbor only a few times, a man in his early 30s, tall, quiet, always polite but distant. They had never exchanged more than a quick nod in the hallway. She didn't even know his name. But she remembered he once carried a box labeled electronics. That was reason enough. She hesitated. What if he thought she was weird? What if he said no? What if he didn't answer? Her heart raced at the thought of knocking on his door. But then again, what was worse, a few seconds of awkwardness or another night of deafening silence? Emily took a deep breath and stood up. She walked to her door, paused with her hand on the knob, and looked back at the silent TV. It felt like a sign. Something needed to change. Even if it was something as small as asking a neighbor for help. She turned the knob and stepped into the hallway, each step echoing like a decision she couldn't undo. Her hand raised to knock. Tap. Tap. Silence. Then footsteps. The door creaked open. And in that moment, without even knowing it, Emily's life was about to change in a way she never imagined. The door opened slowly, revealing the man who lived next door, the quiet neighbor Emily had only seen in passing. Up close, he looked slightly tired but friendly. His dark hair was a little messy, as if he'd just woken up from a nap, and he wore a faded t-shirt and sweatpants. He looked surprised, but not annoyed. "Yes?" he asked, his voice deep but soft. Emily felt her nerves spike. She almost forgot what to say. "Hi. I'm sorry to bother you. My TV stopped working and I thought you might know how to fix it. I remember seeing you with a box of electronics once." There was a short pause. He looked at her curiously, then gave a polite smile. "Yeah, I could take a look. I used to work in tech support, actually." "Oh, great. Thank you," Emily said, both relieved and embarrassed at the same time. She stepped back so he could follow her to her apartment. As he walked in, she realized how long it had been since someone else had entered her space. Her apartment wasn't messy, but it definitely looked lived in, a half-finished mug of tea on the coffee table, a blanket slung over the couch, and books stacked haphazardly near the window. He glanced around, not judging, just observant. "I'm Alex, by the way," he said while kneeling in front of the TV stand. "Emily," she replied, watching him carefully as he began checking the wires and buttons with experienced hands. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. "I didn't think anyone still had these older models," he said with a smirk, opening the back panel of the TV. Emily laughed softly. "Yeah, I guess I'm a little behind the times." "Well, nothing wrong with that. These are easier to fix than the newer ones anyway," he said, continuing his inspection. As he worked, she noticed how calm he was. There was something quiet but solid about him, the kind of calm that made the room feel less heavy. So, do you fix electronics for a living? She asked, trying to make conversation. Used to. I do remote freelance work now. IT stuff. Moved here 6 months ago. Emily was surprised. 6 months, and she never once properly spoke to him. After about 10 minutes, Alex stood up and pointed the remote at the TV. He pressed the power button. To her amazement, the screen flickered to life. Clear picture. Working sound. It was just a loose connection, he said. Easy fix. Emily blinked at the screen, then looked at him. That's amazing. Thank you. Really? No problem, he said, heading toward the door. But just as he reached for the handle, he paused. Hey, I was about to heat up some leftovers. Would you like to join? It's nothing fancy, just pasta, but it beats eating alone. Emily hesitated. And then, almost without thinking, she said, sure. It was a small word. But in that moment, it felt like a door had opened, not just the one between their apartments, but something inside her heart, too. Emily followed Alex into his apartment just a few feet away, yet it felt like entering a completely different world. His space was cozy, minimalist, and clean, but not in an overly neat way. It felt lived in, just like hers. A bookshelf stood against one wall, lined with paperbacks and a few framed photos. A large window let in soft evening light, casting a warm hue over everything. The scent of garlic and tomatoes hung in the air. Make yourself at home, Alex said, heading toward the small open kitchen. I've got pasta with red sauce. Hope you like it spicy. I do, Emily replied, standing awkwardly by the couch before slowly settling into it. Her heart was still beating a little fast, not from nerves, exactly, but from the strange realization that she hadn't shared a meal with someone in months. Maybe longer. Alex returned a few minutes later with 2 plates and handed her one. She noticed the chipped edges and smiled. Real plates. Not takeout containers. They ate in silence for the first few minutes, the TV now forgotten. Emily found herself stealing quick glances at Alex, not because he was particularly handsome, though he was, in a quiet, everyday kind of way, but because there was something gentle in his energy. Something steady. This is good, she said, breaking the silence. Thanks. Cooking's one of the only things that slows my brain down, he replied. Makes me feel grounded. She nodded. I get that. For me, it's reading. Or music. But even those don't work lately. He looked at her with a flicker of understanding. Rough year. Something like that, she said softly, not ready to dive into the details just yet. You. Same, he said simply. No explanation offered, but none was needed. After dinner, they stayed on the couch, their empty plates on the coffee table. Alex turned on the TV and flipped through a few channels before settling on a random comedy show. The laugh track filled the room, and to her surprise, Emily actually laughed, really laughed, at one of the jokes. Alex smiled. There it is. There what? She asked. Your real laugh, he said. It's a good sound. She blushed slightly and looked away. Compliments felt foreign now, like a language she hadn't spoken in a long time. They watched in silence for a while, but it wasn't awkward. It was companionable, warm. Every now and then, their shoulders brushed slightly as they shifted, and Emily felt the smallest spark, not necessarily romantic, but deeply human. As the show ended, Emily stood up. I should get back. Thank you for dinner. For the TV. For everything. Alex stood, too, and walked her to the door. You're welcome, Emily. Anytime. As she stepped back into her apartment, the air felt different. Lighter. Her TV worked now, but she wasn't in a rush to turn it on. For the first time in a long while, she didn't need background noise. She had something better, the echo of real laughter, the warmth of shared pasta, and the memory of a simple favor that had quietly changed everything. The next few days passed like soft ripples across a quiet lake. Nothing dramatic happened, yet everything felt subtly altered. Emily found herself humming while making coffee, opening her blinds a little earlier, even dressing in real clothes before noon instead of the usual worn-out pajamas. A quiet energy had returned to her life, not loud or thrilling, just gently hopeful. She didn't see Alex immediately after that dinner. just the occasional sound of his door shutting or footsteps in the hallway. But even those little reminders of his presence carried a strange comfort. They were no longer strangers. Then one evening, just as she was microwaving leftovers, there was a knock on her door. She opened it to find Alex standing there, holding a small bowl of popcorn and 2 soda cans. "I was going to watch a movie," he said casually. "Thought maybe you'd like to join?" Emily smiled without hesitation. "Sure. Let me grab a sweater." They ended up back on his couch, the movie playing on low volume. It wasn't particularly good, some sci-fi thriller with awkward dialogue, but neither of them seemed to care. The room was dim, lit only by the soft flicker of the screen, and the occasional crunch of popcorn was the only sound between them. What struck Emily the most was the silence, not the kind she feared in her apartment, not the heavy, isolating silence that pressed on her chest at night. This was a different kind. A shared silence. The kind where presence itself was enough. No need for words. No pressure to perform. Just 2 people, being. Halfway through the movie, she realized how close they were sitting. Their arms rested just inches apart. She could feel the warmth of his shoulder, the steady rhythm of his breath. For a moment, her thoughts tried to spin into something more. Is this turning into something romantic? What does he want? What do I want? But she stopped herself. This moment didn't need a label. It was connection, plain and simple. "I'm glad you knocked on my door," Alex said quietly, without looking away from the screen. Emily turned to him, surprised. "I mean, I don't get a lot of visitors," he continued. "Or go looking for them. But that night, it was nice." She smiled gently. "I almost didn't. I stood in the hallway for a full minute before I got the courage." "Well, I'm glad you did." They exchanged a small look. It wasn't flirty. It wasn't charged. It was honest. 2 people slowly peeling back the armor they wore. When the movie ended, neither of them said much. Emily yawned and stood to leave, and Alex walked her to the door as before. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. Emily tilted her head. "You planning another sci-fi disaster?" He laughed. "Something better. Maybe a comedy." "I'd like that," she said, and for the first time in a long time, she meant it. She returned to her apartment, quietly grateful. The silence in her home still existed, but it no longer felt empty. It felt full of the potential of something new. The movie nights became a ritual, quiet, comforting, and unexpectedly healing. Every evening, around the same time, there would be a knock on Emily's door, or she'd show up at Alex's with a snack in hand. They didn't talk much at first, at least not deeply. But the silence between them had turned into something soft and sacred. It was a Thursday night when everything shifted. They were halfway through a drama about 2 strangers stranded in a snowstorm. On screen, the characters opened up about their pasts, their fears, and their regrets. Something about it must have struck a nerve because, suddenly, Emily reached for the remote and paused the movie. Alex looked over, slightly confused. "Everything okay?" She hesitated, then nodded, more to herself than to him. "I haven't told you much about me." "You don't have to," he said gently. "I know. But I want to." She took a deep breath and let the words come. "I moved here after a really bad breakup. For years together. I thought we were going to get married. But one day he just left. Said he didn't feel it anymore. No warning. No reason. Just like that." Alex didn't interrupt. He didn't look shocked or uncomfortable. He just listened. "I think that broke something in me," Emily continued, her voice low. "Not just the relationship, but my ability to trust. I stopped going out, stopped seeing friends. My world just shrank." There was a long silence after she finished. She expected him to offer advice or reassurance. Instead, he said something that surprised her. "I lost someone too," Alex said quietly. Emily turned to face him. His expression had shifted, less guarded, more vulnerable. "My sister. 2 years ago. Car accident." She was only 24. Emily's breath caught. "She was the only family I had left," he continued. "We were close. Best friends. After she died. I couldn't be around people. I didn't want to talk, didn't want to answer questions. So I left my job. Moved here. started over. The room felt heavier, but not in a painful way, in a real way. The kind of weight that came with truth. "I'm so sorry, Alex," she said softly. He nodded, his eyes glistening but steady. "It's okay. I don't tell many people. But you. I don't know. I feel like I can." Emily felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, but she smiled through them. "I'm glad you did." They didn't need to say more. They sat there in the soft glow of the paused movie screen, sharing the quiet not as strangers, but as two people with bruised hearts slowly learning to breathe again. That night, when Emily returned to her apartment, she felt lighter. Their stories had been different, but the pain was familiar. And in that shared sorrow, they had found something rare: understanding. Something was beginning. Not romance, not yet. Something better. Healing. The days that followed were calm and full of small, meaningful moments, shared meals, quiet conversations, evenings spent watching old movies, and the occasional laughter that lingered long after the screen had gone dark. Emily and Alex had carved out a safe space between them, built on kindness, vulnerability, and unspoken understanding. But peace has a fragile edge, and healing isn't always a straight line. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon when the storm broke, both outside and between them. Emily had invited Alex over for lunch. She had been feeling bold, even excited. She'd cooked something from scratch, a creamy chicken pasta dish she hadn't made since her ex. A small gesture, maybe, but one that felt meaningful. Alex arrived with a bottle of iced tea and a tired smile. His eyes looked distant, as though his mind was somewhere else. They sat at the table, the clinking of cutlery echoing louder than usual. "This is really good," he said after a few bites, but his tone was flat, distracted. "Thanks," Emily replied, trying not to sound disappointed. "You okay?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "Just tired." She nodded, but something tightened in her chest. She could feel the distance, not physical, but emotional, creeping back in. "I noticed you haven't answered my texts the last couple days," she said, her voice gentle but probing. "I wasn't sure if I did something wrong." Alex looked up, surprised. "No, it's not that. I've been in my head. A lot." Emily waited, hoping he would say more. But he didn't. "I get that," she said after a pause. "But when you shut down like that, it feels like I don't exist." Alex looked down at his plate. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you feel that way." There was another silence, sharper now. The kind that came with walls being rebuilt. "I know you're still grieving," Emily said, her voice quieter now. "And I know healing takes time. But I'm not just someone to pass time with, Alex. I care about you. Whatever this is, it matters to me." Alex stood up suddenly, pacing toward the window. The rain pattered against the glass like a ticking clock. "You don't understand," he said, his voice tight. "Everyone I've ever opened up to, they either left or got taken away. My sister, my dad, my last girlfriend, all gone. And now you want more from me, and I don't know if I have it to give." Emily stood too, her heart racing. "I'm not asking you to fix everything, Alex. I'm asking you to stop hiding from the people who care. From me." He looked at her, and for a moment, his eyes were full of something: fear, anger, pain, all tangled together. And then he said the words she didn't expect. "Maybe we rushed this. Maybe we should take some space." Emily felt like the air had been knocked from her lungs. "Oh." He turned back toward the window, unable to meet her gaze. She didn't argue, didn't plead. Instead, she quietly walked to the door, grabbed her keys, and left, letting the storm outside soak her completely, not caring. The silence had returned to her apartment that night. But it wasn't peaceful anymore. It was sharp, cold, unforgiving. And this time, it wasn't the TV that was broken. It was trust. 2 days passed. The silence between Emily and Alex stretched like a crack in glass, thin but deep, fragile and impossible to ignore. She hadn't heard from him since that painful afternoon. No messages. No knocks. No noise from the apartment next door. At first, Emily told herself she was fine. She tried to keep busy reorganizing her bookshelf, cleaning her kitchen, even finally fixing the wobbly chair that had annoyed her for months. But beneath the motion, a quiet ache settled in her chest. What hurt wasn't the space between them. It was that after all the vulnerability they had shared, he had chosen to retreat. On the third day, a soft thud came from her doorstep. Curious, Emily opened the door to find a book, one she had mentioned wanting to read weeks ago, sitting on the floor with a sticky note on top. It read, "For the quiet days." Her breath caught. It was a small gesture, but full of meaning. A whisper of apology. A breadcrumb of connection. She picked up the book and stood for a moment before, almost without thinking, she walked to his door. No answer when she knocked. No sound inside. She turned back toward her apartment, but just as she reached for her door, she heard it, his voice. "Emily?" She turned. He was standing there, barefoot, hair messy, eyes tired. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I wasn't sure you wanted me to," she replied. Alex leaned against the door frame, arms crossed, like he needed it to stay standing. "I've been thinking a lot." She waited. "You were right," he said quietly. "I push people away. Not because I don't care, but because I care too much. And it scares the hell out of me." He stepped aside, motioning her inside. She hesitated, then entered. The apartment looked the same, but the energy felt different, heavier, more raw. Alex walked to the bookshelf and pulled down a framed photo. He handed it to her. A young woman smiled back, freckles, short curly hair, standing next to him in what looked like a hospital room. "That's Sarah," he said. "My sister." She wasn't just family. She was my anchor. When I lost her, I didn't just lose her. I lost my direction. Emily's voice was soft. "Is that where you were that night? When you were distant?" He nodded. "It was the anniversary of her death. I didn't want to talk about it. I thought I could ignore it or handle it alone. But I shut you out instead." She handed the photo back gently. "You don't have to handle it alone." Alex looked at her, eyes filled with something softer now, not fear, but remorse. "And maybe hope." "I'm sorry, Emily. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just afraid of losing someone else." "You can't lose me," she said, her voice steady. "Not if you let me stay." He stepped closer, almost tentative. "Then stay." It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. No tears, no dramatic music. Just two people broken, scared, but willing to try again. Willing to let the past breathe without letting it define them. That night, they didn't watch a movie. They sat on the floor with cups of tea, talking about their favorite childhood memories, their fears, the things they missed, and the things they still hoped for. It wasn't the end of their pain, but it was the start of something better. Forgiveness. 1 week later, the world felt different, not completely fixed, but realigned in some small, meaningful way. Emily sat by her window one sunny morning, her favorite book in her lap, coffee in hand. The television, now working perfectly, remained off. For the first time in a long time, she didn't need background noise to fill the quiet. The silence no longer haunted her. There was a soft knock on her door. She smiled before she even got up. Alex stood there, holding a potted plant, a small, leafy thing with a crooked stem and soil that looked freshly watered. "I figured your window needed something green," he said. Emily laughed, taking it from him gently. "It's perfect. Looks a little damaged, though." "Just like us," he said with a grin. She stepped aside and let him in. They had slipped into something unspoken but clear, not labeled, not pressured, just steady. The emotional edge between them had softened. The walls they once built to protect themselves were now doors, open, waiting. That afternoon, they took a walk together for the first time. A real walk through the park, past coffee shops and flower stands, sharing stories about people they once knew, meals they missed, and the little joys they'd forgotten to appreciate. Emily noticed the way the sun caught in Alex's eyes when he laughed. He noticed how her face lit up when she talked about her favorite poetry. They were learning each other again, not the broken pieces, but the parts that had survived. That night, back in her apartment, they sat on the floor again, no TV, no noise. Just the sound of wind against the windows and their quiet conversation. "I never thought asking for help would change so much," Emily said suddenly. Alex looked at her. "Neither did I." She reached for his hand. He didn't flinch this time. He held hers firmly, like someone who had finally stopped running. And just like that, something unspoken became something real. Not a fairy tale. Not a perfect ending. Just a beginning, honest and a little messy, but rooted in truth. Two people, once strangers, now stitched together by small acts of courage, a knock on a door, a plate of pasta, a broken TV, a shared silence, and the decision to stay even when it hurt. That was the real miracle. Not the help, but the healing. 42.